Hello guys, it's Thomas here to another Reimagining series video, the 5th one already, so this is going to be for Sparking, our second to last one actually, so yeah. Something to note with this one in particular, compared to the other ones, is that there are a lot of new bays this time, so not going to be as many visuals because there's not as much to compare to with some of these. But yeah, hopefully it'll be fun to hear about some of my brand new ideas. I've been very excited to share some of these, so finally to do that. Also, one other kind of just side note is for double chassis, or not even double chassis, just chassis in general. For example, right, Diabolos released before Spriggan. Usually with chassis, you follow kind of the number of when it was released. So if I give that a new chassis, it would be 2 balance, whereas Spriggan would then have to be moved to 3 balance. I'm going to ignore this, and I'm just going to leave something like Spriggan's chassis as 2 balance, and anything after that, regardless of where it was released, will just be a number after that. I feel like it just gets a little bit messy if I do it the other way, so personally I think the best thing to do here is to just leave the numbers alone, and anything new just has a brand new number assigned to it, so yeah. So that said, let's go ahead and get into all of the new stuff that I'm coming up with. And of course, the first thing though we have to get through are kind of the already existing bays that I want to personally alter. So the first one is Glide Ragnaruk. So Glide Ragnaruk, how do I want to change this thing? So this is one of the more simple ones. First up, the driver. Just make this a dash driver. Revolve dash should have been the driver this had. I feel like it kind of deserved it. Also, the lock on this thing's a bit messed up. So yeah, fix the lock for this thing. Don't have the chip raised and stuff. Like, the lock on this thing was awful. That should be fixed. And then also give it a dash driver. This thing would not burst much. And I think that's pretty fair because Glide, well, round, it wasn't like a groundbreaking ring either. I don't think it's like that crazy of a ring. So I think making it, or giving it a dash driver rather, isn't a big deal. And Revolve isn't like a crazy driver. So fix the lock, give it a dash driver. Basically, I'm just buffing the lock heavily on this thing, and I think that's really all it needed. So yeah, it's a pretty simple change overall for this one. Going from one of the most simple changes in the video, we're now going to get into one of the most complicated, I'd probably say, yeah, no, the most complicated rework in this video. And that, I think, is a pretty obvious one. Diabolos. This thing just sucked. They split it in half into Death and Abyss, and they're just bad. So we're going to basically reform them into one single bay. So first up, the Diabolos chip I would actually keep almost the same, aside from just some recoloring, which I'd make this red, and then I'd keep some gold. I'd also add some black and white onto this chip as well. And yeah, basically we're just going back to master colors. Primarily red with some gold. However, for the right side of the ring, I would have some black. With the left side, I'd have some white. As for the ring, though, obviously, because it's, you know, 2 of them here, and I mentioned a flippable ring, we're going to go with Abyss. I'm actually going to make Abyss kind of double-sided, and I think that's fair enough. I think Abyss being kind of the double-sided ring, I think just works better, personally. So we'll stick to this shape. I think it's a decent shape. I think it works, again, fine enough here. I don't think you really need anything in particular with this bay because of the other gimmick it has. So this ring, I think, is kind of another kind of almost like a variant situation where the ring doesn't need to be all that crazy because of its other gimmick that is just insane. So we're going to leave Abyss, just kind of making it a flippable ring, but leaving everything else as is. So what's the chassis and what's the driver? So for the chassis, it's going to be 3 balance. 3 balance is going to be a very large and round chassis. So a lot of the metal on the chassis, well, there's kind of the disc piece, which will stay, of course, in the center, but most of the metal will be on the outside of the double chassis. And also there is sort of an orientation gimmick with this thing. Depending on how it's oriented will determine effectively how it works. So with one mode, it'll just kind of be this large chassis with good outward weight distribution, and that's how it generally will be for any other combo with any other driver. However, The driver on this thing is going to be a little bit different. So the driver itself is going to be called Shell. It's going to be very similar to something like Bullet. So Bullet obviously had the whole gimmick where it does this, and it splits apart, except this mini bay kind of sucks, honestly. There isn't a whole lot to it. So what do I do here? So first up, I would probably make this a bit more reinforced, because I don't like how this looks. It just seems a little bit too fragile, so we're going to put a little bit of metal on this thing to make it, you know, feel not as fragile. And also with this piece, this would be a much different piece. It can have kind of the same general system that Bullet does, but I would make it, again, this outer piece kind of goes, and it's sort of similar to this, I guess, in some ways, but probably without the metal, actually. Just plastic, maybe a little bit bigger as well. But the main thing is it has some grooves and attachment points. So this interacts with 3 balance. With 3 balance in its sort of not, you know, because obviously it has 2 modes. One mode, again, just being a stationary, large double chassis. It's good for outward weight distribution. But the other mode would actually give it a chance to kind of attach onto Shell. And what that would do is it would basically act as a giant bullet, which is what I think they could have done, and what they should have done is just make a giant bullet, but they just opted to not for whatever reason. But anyway, so the reason I put all the metal on the outside, or at least most of the metal on the outside of 3 balance, is because of this, because the outer piece of plastic with a lot of the metal for this double chassis will split off onto this thing. Both of these bays would probably be kinda light. But that's the thing, is that you get 2 bays. So, you know, obviously the main bay'd probably be maybe lower end of like GT weight. Whereas kind of the, or maybe even a little bit lower than that, maybe more, almost like Chosy weight. But the kind of separate piece would almost be more like a dual layer type of weight, but larger at the same time. So with this kind of interactivity between Shell and 3 balance, you could basically have a much larger, you know, bay to split off. And it almost works much more like the Bunsen core from Phantom Fox MS, which is what Bullet was trying to effectively mimic. So with that, we basically have a much more functional version of that. And yes, it's technically still not like the best gimmick, but it's just a really cool one, and I really wish they would have given it justice. And I think with this type of system, they definitely could have, and that's why I decided to go down this route. So yeah, it's a little bit convoluted, a little bit weird, but hopefully it made enough sense and got the general idea across. Next up, we have World Spriggan. World Spriggan is a bit of a weird bay to me, and I always found it very boring personally. However, I'm going to do a couple things here to change it up. So first up, we're going to just add small amounts of metal onto the blade, probably on these 2 sections here, underneath a little bit, probably on the other side. And then also these sort of, where'd they go? I just lost them somehow. These parts. I don't know how I just lost that for like 10 seconds, but anyway. So these parts right here, they push in and are burst stoppers. I would make the outer parts of these rubber. So, yeah. Now, the reason I'm a little bit slow to say this is because buffing World to give it extra metal and also adding rubber onto it, that's definitely kind of insane, because a lot of people think World is a really great LR piece, and it is. So to counteract this, these burst stopper pieces, I'm actually going to make them stick out a little bit more, which will hopefully help to make them a little more functional when they hit, but at the same time, it makes the bay a little bit less round. So you do get the metal and rubber like I think Spriggan's should have at this point, but it does make it a little bit less round. Not like completely ruining it, but again, just giving a little bit of a nerf there to compensate for the metal and the rubber, but also hopefully making the burst stopper a little bit more active, just slightly. It's not perfect. I don't think this burst stopper gimmick is the best, but I think it's fine to have. And again, I think maybe trying to make it a little bit more prominent here would be fine, and that's what I'm doing, while also giving it the typical Spriggan stuff that, again, I think it should have. So again, Pretty simple change for World Spriggan. Alright, next up we have the most simple change in this video. Hyperion Burn. Make this thing not burst every 5 seconds. Just make the lock a little better. That's all. That is literally all that needs to be done here. This thing is awful. It needs a better lock, and if that were fixed, I think this thing, while again maybe not perfect, it still works fine for what it wants to do, and I think what it wants to do is okay enough for this bay. So yeah, just fix the lock, and that's literally all that has to be done with this thing. Next up, we have Hollow Deathscyther. Hollow Deathscyther is a bit of a weird case. I actually think that the layer here is perfectly fine, honestly. So, yeah, nothing wrong with this layer, but I don't agree with this disc choice, and the driver choice is also a bit problematic for what I've done in earlier parts. First up, 12 acts. There should just not be core discs and frames by Superking. Obviously, I eliminated the other bays with this, with changing up Diabolos, but Deathscyther is the last remaining one, so we're going to get rid of this. I also put acts on Killer Deathscyther a few episodes ago, so yeah. Also, Hyxel Dash is a bit problematic because I did swap out Excel for Kinetic, a original driver I made, on the original Deathscyther. So Excel no longer particularly makes sense here anymore. So that probably should be changed as well. So let's get the new parts here, and these are not color matched at all. Apologies for that, I'm just trying to get the point across for the actual parts here. But first up, Drake. I just think Drake being kind of unbalanced honestly works for a Deathscyther, especially Hollow Deathscyther. And as far as the driver goes, we're actually going to go with High Jaggy Dash. I kind of just like Jaggy, and again, going back to kind of an older driver, Kinetic was kind of an early version of Jaggy, very much a pre-evolution to it, so I feel like going with the Jaggy is just a more sensible choice here, rather than going with Kinetic, so we're going to go ahead and make this combo, which I think is honestly kind of a funny combo, but yeah. So here it is. Hollow Deathscyther, Drake, High Jaggy Dash 4 attack, and color matching is abysmal here, but you do have kind of the outward weight on the sides here, making this thing even more wild, and also just Jaggy to kind of fill the role of High Excel Dash. So overall, I think this is kind of a better Deathscyther. The disc choice, I think, is a much better disc. And it just makes a lot more sense. And again, the driver just kind of was a byproduct of a choice I made way earlier, pretty much at the start of the series. Actually, the first thing I ever did in the series, in fact. So, because I changed that, this has to be changed here. So, with that, that's kind of my newer version of Hollow Deathscyther. Hopefully it just toughens it up a little bit to make it, the stock combo, just not suck as much. Hopefully. Okay, next up we have Jet Wyvern. Jet Wyvern was a weird bay. I don't like everything in this bay, but I think I have less problems with most things existing here, but there is one fatal flaw of this thing. This is one of the very few times where I just wish we didn't get a new part. The only thing I think Just does right is actually the color, which I will be keeping on the other driver that I'm swapping this out to. So we're just going to go ahead and swap this driver out for Atomic. Atomic is just a better choice. But we're going to change it up to make it Atomic Metal. So this ball here is metal. However, I probably will leave a gap within the ball, kind of a hollow spot, probably a decent sized hollow spot, to make this thing function. Because if this thing doesn't have a hollow spot, I think the metal is just a little bit too dense and heavy to really work properly. So we're going to have a hollow spot to make it not too bad. It's not something you can really see, but just mentioning that now. So, yeah. Again, I do want to keep this color, but yeah. I'd probably make this ring here magenta to match around. And obviously this ball here is metal, so yeah. Swapping out just for Atomic Metal because I think it would have been cool to get Atomic Metal, and also it's just a far more sensible driver than Just ever was. And it kind of continues to evolve the ball idea from Wyvern, giving us a kind of new cool idea with atomic metal. It's not like that crazy, but I just think it would have been a sensible part for Wyvern to have, and I just think it's what it should have had from the start, personally. Next up, we have Death Solomon. Death Solomon is a funny one because, well, death actually doesn't exist anymore because we got rid of it with merging Diabolos into one bay. So what do we do here? Well, why not just give death to Solomon, keep it, but now it originally releases here? It's a little bit of an awkward situation, but I feel like this would be the best thing to do personally. So yeah, death is going to stay here. I'd probably give it a small amount of metal, like maybe here and here. Just a little bit of metal. Just make this thing a little bit heavier, give it a little bit more weight. It's not a great ring, but it's just something to make it a little better. And I don't think every part needs to be competitive, but I still think it could just use a little bit of a boost. I'm also going to change death to pretty much be like World, where it has the option to choose with the free spin, so 2 balance has a bit more of a use here. And the driver, Metal Fusion, we're going to get rid of Fusion, and we're going to give it Metal Unite. And I know, yeah, we're just using the Unite Dash from World Spriggan, but it's fine enough, right? So anyway, I wouldn't actually do these colors, I'd actually do them inverted, so I'd actually use sort of this translucent yellowish color for Unite Dash, and actually do red rubber here, so it's the inverse of this. Although this looks pretty nice too. But yeah, basically just a lot of quality of life changes. Again, I guess death is now just exclusive to this thing, also adding a little bit of metal onto it to make it a little better. Giving death the option to choose 2 balances mode, because I think it should just have access to that personally. And just giving it a better driver, because Fusion sucks, and I think Metal Unite is at least a bit of a better choice, so just a little bit of a buff to this thing and making it a little bit cooler, in my opinion. So yeah, that's really all for Death Solomon. Hopefully it's a little bit more interesting than it was on its initial release, so yeah. Okay, now we have our last bay that already exists, and that is, of course, First Uranus. First Uranus is a bit of a weird one because it technically got a stock combo, actually 2 of them, one for the anime, one for the manga, but we never actually got the official stock combo releases, but you can make them. It was a weird situation, but anyway, the manga stock combo gives it Wheel Mobius 1 defense, while the anime stock combo gives it Mobius 2 defense. So I think this thing should have just been released with its anime stock combo, with 2 defense and Mobius. However, we're going to make one alteration to this combo. So in the anime combo, this thing didn't really have, like, the rubber on this, so what we're going to do is we're going to release this thing without the rubber in it. It's just going to be kind of the holes on this thing, and we're going to call it 0 defense. So First Uranus Mobius 0 defense. There you go, it's a prototype version of 2 defense. This whole thing was meant to almost be like a prototype Sparking Bay, prototype to Lucifer. I don't see why they wouldn't release a 0 defense with kind of the same idea where it's just 2 defense without its main gimmick. I kind of feel like that's a little too perfect to pass up on. So we're going to be doing that in this video to just mention the idea because, again, I think this would have been the best way to go about it. And again, it also just gives this thing a proper stock combo release, which is just nice to see. So I think this would just work much, much better for First Uranus, personally anyway. Alright, and now we get to the part of the video where I get to talk about all of my original Beyblade creations, effectively. So, this time around, I have 5 brand new bays I've come up with. So, yeah. The first one here is going to be called Bond Kerbeus Keep-4 Defense. So it's going to be very similar to something like Chain Kerbeus, I would say. Shape could be a little bit different. I would probably still have the chains like green or something. So the magenta's not here yet. Also, this part, I would probably have some like red-orange type of details on the chip, but I wouldn't have the rubber here yet. The chip design would be very similar to this, kind of a mix of the one I came up with the GT video, and the one here. And then the Bond ring, again, it's kind of similar to something like this, but a little bit thinner. but it would have the same sort of gimmick that chain has, kind of the tact gimmick. And yeah, there'd be 6 of these chains that would be able to move around like this, just kind of these small movements here. However, then we have, of course, 4 attack and keep dash. Keep would just be very similar to the one Bushin Ashura has. Like, I might make it a little bit of a lighter green and then maybe make this a bit more of a red-orange to make it different enough. But, yeah, this isn't going to be that much different, honestly, so... Yeah, it's still a pretty similar driver. But yeah, it is the dash version, so that's pretty nice to include here. So, anyway, with Bond and 4 defense. So, anyway, 4 defense would also have a gimmick, and it'd be the same tact gimmick. There'd be 6 chains. So you'd have kind of a wall of 2 sets of these chains, which I think is pretty cool, actually. So anyway, yeah, you have 2 sets of chains that can move around. However, there'd also be an alternate orientation, where if you put it on the other side, these chains would be locked. All 12 of them, the one from the chassis, and the one from the ring would just be completely locked outwards. So that's how that works. So yeah, it's basically just a sparking version of tact that uses the double chassis to kind of make it a bit more unique. And yeah, it's kind of what I would do here. It's not like the most interesting bay of all time, but I think it's kind of just a cool bay that works off of some of the stuff that I was doing with the GT version of Kerbeus. Of course, with Tact Kerbeus, because I literally gave it, I repurposed Tact Belongingness into Tact Kerbeus. And then kind of going a little bit closer to Chain Kerbeus, but not quite there. It's just kind of its own unique middle ground version with the chassis gimmick, of course. Having a bit of a, well, I guess giving the sparking version a bit of its own identity, which I think is nice. So that's basically everything for Bond Kerbeus, though. Moving along, we probably have the most self-explanatory bay here, but Noble Xcalibur Iron Dash 5 attack. So, yeah, Noble Xcalibur, okay. So basically, the chip design would be mostly metal, and kind of a similar sword design to something like Buster Xcalibur with like the X in the middle here. There would not be a chip core for this thing. It would be a fused chip and chip core, I guess, or yeah, there's just metal in the center for that, so no need for a chip core. But yeah, just a lot of metal there for the chip. As far as the ring goes, I'd actually make it more of kind of a xiphoid / Sieg type of shape. And then also I'd have kind of a piece like this on the edge of the ring, which would be metal. So yeah, it just pairs up with the chip. And I think with how the sparking system works, that actually look pretty good too. So yeah, it'd just be something for that. So it's not that overly complicated of a layer design, but there you go. Also the chassis, the shape would be sort of similar to something like, again, this, almost like a square-ish shape, with a point that would of course be meant to pair this, and the metal would also have a point going outwards. Again, just to pair up with this. And as far as the driver goes, we're going with Iron Dash. So, again, this is by far the most simple bay here. It's just kind of keeping the general idea of some of the previous Excaliburs that I've, well, I guess the last one I came up with, and also just in general some of the previous Excaliburs. And just kind of adapting that rather, into the sparking system. So yeah, it's just a sparking Excalibur that I think would work as a nice attack type and goes more towards the Sieg / xiphoid shape, which I think works the best personally, so there's Noble Excalibur. Alright, next up we have Shock Zeus Planet Dash 3 Stamina. So, yeah, we're making another big jump here, I guess, because the last Zeus was from God, although I did make a Flare Zeus in GT. So first up, the Zeus chip will kind of be a built, well, kind of a version of like the GT version of the Zeus chip, just kind of building on that a little bit. For a sparking version, again, kind of having a similar, more detailed face design that we saw here. And above that, of course, we'll have some lightning designs on the kind of top half of the chip. So then we get to the Shock Ring. So Shock will be kind of similar to something like this with shape, although the actual ball placement is much, much different, so it won't just be kind of grouped into these two areas. I'd probably make the gold a little bit more even as well, but anyway. The actual ball, like the metal balls inside, well, there's going to be 6 of them, and they'll be distributed evenly, so it'll be kind of like a hexagon type of design. So yeah, they'll be able to move in and out. And again, there's 6 of them evenly distributed, so instead of flare, like kind of how they move kind of almost at an angle, these are just straight up and down, and again, they're evenly distributed. Outside of that, we then get to 3 stamina, the double chassis. And for the double chassis, it would be kind of like a round, sort of a double chassis version of that, but you have the 4 metal balls, but they'd be able to move in and out. There'd be spots for them to kind of go back inward a bit, and then also again come outward. So it's just a double chassis version of a round with more movement for the metal balls. And again, they are larger as well, like a round. They're not the really small ones that we see on the ring for shock. And then, of course, the driver is Planet Dash, because I just think Planet Dash works well here personally. So same color scheme and everything for Planet. And yeah, Planet Dash, again, just works. And yeah, just kind of moving along with the metal ball idea, again, expanding on a round, which I did give to Flare Zeus last time, and then also I think Shock just works better overall compared to Flare in my personal opinion. And again, the shape would go back to something closer to Galaxy Zeus, unlike Flare. So, kind of going backwards a bit, which I think makes sense for Sparking, because Sparking was very much referencing older stuff. So yeah, Shock Zeus, hopefully it is a good Sparking version of Zeus, so yeah. Alright, our second to last bay here is going to be Ash Phoenix Friction-5 Defense. So, for the chip design, I would have a pretty similar version of, well, Phoenix, what we saw in Revive Phoenix, except this kind of part down here would be metal, and because of that, there would be no chip core, so there'd be a little bit of metal on this thing. And again, not using a chip core for this. Then we have Ash. So Ash, the ring would be very similar to how Revive Phoenix looks, the outer piece here. And yeah, there would be kind of a smaller, thin, round inner piece like this underneath. So, yeah. But the outer piece that does fly off would be similar to this, although I'd probably change it the metal to kind of be like on the wings here, on all 4 of them. So to give it a little bit of its own identity with that, having different metal distribution that's not like Revive or Dead, although the shape would be, again, pretty similar to Revive here. The armor would also fly off in a similar manner to Revive and Dead, where it just kind of slides off and like that, and kind of comes off easily. It doesn't need to come off the top as much like Prominence, which isn't a good thing, so we're keeping the better version here. Which again, I do think makes the most sense. So yeah, you do have some metal, again, on this thing. It wouldn't be a ton, though. It would just be a little bit on the wings. I wouldn't do any others, like any other metal under here, though, because you still have the double chassis and metal on the core, so I don't think you really need a ton of extra weight there. So we're going to leave that alone. As far as the other stuff goes, 5 defense and Friction Dash. I guess Friction Dash is very self-explanatory, be the same color as this, just a dash version. So now we get to 5 defense. 5 defense would be another chassis that would have kind of an orientation gimmick. If they did this for 2 balance, I kind of feel like it was always a waste for them to not do more of this, where they were able to change modes based on orientations, which is why I've been seeing so much of it. But yeah, with this one, there's 2 modes. These modes don't really matter if you use it with any other ring, but with Ash in particular, it does matter. One mode makes it just kind of a chassis that pairs, like the shape just pairs nicely with the Ash ring. And that's about it, honestly. That's really all there is to it. There isn't a whole lot extra. But the other mode would allow it to kind of be able to connect with the Ash ring, with the outside in particular. And when that connects, the outer piece disconnects from the chassis and is now locked into the Ash ring. So when the Ash ring flies off, It would actually have to go upwards a bit more, so again, acting a little bit closer to something like Prominence, but you get a lot of extra plastic here, so I think it's kind of worth it, and it wouldn't be that bad. It's still, the way it disconnects is still closer to something like Revive or Dead, so it should be better than Prominence with how that armor works, which isn't good. Well, the Prominence armor isn't good, this should be better. But anyway, so this would just grab some extra plastic, no metal on this, it'd just be extra plastic to use as a projectile, which just kind of makes it a thicker projectile, and again would add a bit of weight with the extra plastic. So yeah, you just get that extra connectivity to make a larger projectile, although you do lose a bit more of the base, so you can kind of choose how you want to do that, and I think again this just makes sense for a Sparking Phoenix, and also uses the system with a double chassis. Of course, having that, you know, mode change with potential connectivity with the ring and chassis, which I think just makes sense. And that's kind of how I wanted to design a Sparking Phoenix. And that's how I opted to design it. So there you go. The chassis and ring could connect to make a larger projectile if you want to. But again, there is risk in that. So anyway, there you go. That's Ash Phoenix. Again, hopefully this is a cool Phoenix. I've been wanting to talk about this one actually for a while now. So there you go. Ash Phoenix. And finally, our last bay for this, and that's going to be Regal Genesis Hybrid Dash. With how Genesis is, you basically have to choose between making an entirely new, even more insane bay, and I do have some plans for that in my next video, spoiler alert. But for Sparking, with how many callbacks there are, and with kind of an idea of a final Genesis after this one, I don't think that this needs to be as crazy. I mean, Sparking just has a lot of callbacks, so I think it's fine to make this thing more of an adaptation of Regalia into Sparking, rather than something that's like crazy and really new. But I still want to make it new. So first up, Regal Genesis would just be a fully fused layer. There isn't a whole lot else to do here. It would use the infinite lock system, however, it would have something similar to a built-in Big Bang armor, where it's much harder to push the tabs in, and just a really tough infinite lock. I'd also probably make the sides designed a little bit differently here. I'd keep metal on the layer, but I wouldn't have these massive gaps here. Just be a bit more of a solid layer, since you don't have to fit the Big Bang armor on. And I'd probably put a little bit more metal just in general on this thing to make sure it's a heavy enough layer to compete. So yeah, again, it's just a heavier Regalia Genesis with a bit of a redesign, and the Big Bang armor is effectively with, well, the effects it has anyway are built into this thing. Outside of that, I think hybrid is fine enough, so we're going with Hybrid Dash. It's just hybrid, but a dash driver. Yes, it's an infinite lock base, so it doesn't really need to be dash, but it's just kind of funny to go overkill this thing. This is meant to be like the most unburstable bait of its time, and with an upgraded infinite lock, and a dash driver for no reason, I think it kind of accomplishes that idea. Which is kind of what I wanted to go for here. Just this ridiculous bay that just does everything you could ever want. Kind of like what Regalia does, and yeah, obviously it's not like perfect. And in competitive, I know it's like you can debate how good this thing is competitively, which, I mean, yeah, it's not the best. However, just thematically speaking, obviously an infinite lock and electric driver is supposed to be insane, which is kind of the angle I'm going for here, and I think it works fun enough. And again, it's not the craziest evolution, but I do have plans for that for my next video, and again, I just think this works okay for a Sparking system. So there you go, that's my idea for Regal Genesis, kind of this adaptation of Regalia into Sparking, slash kind of an evolution to it, so yeah, there you go. And yes, just to make it clear, I am keeping the color scheme from Regalia, not going to the color scheme of Big Bang, because I just think white and gold looks way, way better than the purple did, and I think it also just makes sense thematically, personally anyway, so yeah, there you go. There is Regal Genesis, and also the last bay of this entire video. So there you go, that is my entire reimagining for Beyblade Burst Sparking, or Superking, whatever you want to call it, honestly. I'm probably just going to put Sparking in the title because it's more well known as Sparking, I feel like. Probably. Anyway, so, yeah. I kind of felt like this video was going to be longer than it was, but it wasn't, so I guess that might be a good thing, so it wasn't over an hour, because I thought it might have been, but I don't think it's over an hour long. Anyway, so there you go, that's a Sparking video. I've been waiting to do this one for a while, because I thought that some of the ideas here were really cool. Personally, I really like a lot of the original ones, especially the more complicated ones, like Phoenix, for example. I also really like the Diabolos rework. I think that just works so much better for a Diabolos, and it was fun to mess with kind of the chassis idea with having different orientations to different things, which I think could have been expanded on more. I think double chassis also just should have been done a lot more. So, yeah. Overall, though, definitely a fun episode, and after this we have the final one for Beyblade Burst DB/BU, which will be coming out very, very soon. So yeah, I actually want to get this episode out a lot earlier, but I was like sick for 3 weeks. My voice is gone, kind of, and sounded really bad, so I couldn't make this. But I'm back now, and I can do the last episode again very soon. And yeah, so anyway, this episode hopefully was pretty good. Let me know what you thought of some of the ideas. And yeah, it's kind of everything I have to say about it. It was just, I guess everything I already said was said during the video. So anyway, that's all for this. So anyway, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.